Okay, so I am back with another lovely episode. This one is really exciting. I am joined by Susie, who is the Scottish Veterans Commissioner, joining us all the way from Scotland. We're going to have a lovely chat, but this is completely relevant to those that are still serving and, of course, veterans. So before we get stuck in, could you do a little introduction as to who you are and what you do?
Hi Jess, my name is Susie Hamilton and I'm the Scottish Veterans Commissioner. I took up this post in August 2022. Prior to that, I worked for 14 years for a military charity that supports veterans experiencing homelessness. And prior to that, I served in the Royal Navy as an engineer officer for 17 years.
Gosh, so you were in the Navy. How was that for you? And is that, I mean, 17 years is a fair hefty part of your career.
Yes, it was. I mean, I joined at 18 with the intention of doing my engineering degree in service. So the first 4 years, to be perfectly frank, of those 17 years was doing an engineering degree and another training at the now defunct Royal Naval Engineering College. But yes, it was it was an interesting time. I got to go to sea. I spent about 6 years at sea. Did a bit of travel, although because of what was going on at the time, a lot of it was spent in the Gulf. And I probably would have stayed longer, but I became ill and was medically discharged.
Right. And then you moved into the charity area.
Yes, I actually had a short time in industry first. So when I went through my transition, which back in those days for people medically retiring wasn't great. It's much better now. I went into an engineering job because that's really what I was qualified to do. But I started volunteering at a charity called Scottish Veterans Residences. And I realised that the civilian job wasn't for me, the engineering job wasn't for me, and fortunately was offered a job at the charity. And I stayed there for 14 years, so I did enjoy it.
Yeah. And you've now moved into this amazing role as Scottish Veterans Commissioner. How does that come about? Because there can't be many of these jobs around. Are there ones for each of the different countries, or is it specific for Scotland? How does that work?
So Scotland had went first with a Veterans Commissioner in 2014. So I've had two predecessors. That was then followed up by Northern Ireland, and then it was only in 2022 that Wales got their commissioner. England had a veterans, it was called a veterans advisor, actually, a UK advisor, and they're currently advertising for what's now the national commissioner role. So that's, I think the recruiting is still ongoing for that. So that will be starting soon. So yes, it's a public appointment, and so you go through the apply for the job and then go through the public appointments process to get the role.
And what is your role in doing that? It's not political. Is it part of the government? How does that work?
So my role is independent of government, although the Scottish Government pays me to do it. And it's a watchdog type role. So I'm there to challenge the Scottish Government on the public services provided for veterans and families of veterans in Scotland, and also to suggest ways that they can be improved.
Oh, brilliant. And so what point does a person fall into the veterans category? Because we've got a few members at Milspo they were dual serving, but they have left. So they consider themselves both a military wife, military spouse, and a veteran. At what stage does the switch come from serving member, serving family to a veterans family?
Well, I guess, I mean, the definition of veteran is anyone who's done 1 day's paid service. So in theory, people are still serving. They've also done that. But as soon as somebody goes through transition and leaves the paid service of the Crown, then they become a veteran. And so a spouse who has served is also a veteran, absolutely. But I think, I talk a lot about the veteran community in Scotland because I want to make sure that we include spouses and partners, children of serving people and of veterans, and also the bereaved community. So I want to widen that definition because these are all part of the armed forces and veteran community who experience public services in Scotland.
Yeah, and it's really important to include people because there's nothing worse than feeling left out.
Absolutely, and that was one of the big themes of my report that was published in January, which was titled "Anything But Uniform," because I was trying to listen better to the less heard from parts of the community who have historically have felt a bit left out, and that includes families, spouses, partners and children, but also women veterans, LGBT veterans, and people who've come from Commonwealth countries to serve in our armed forces.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up on the women who have served and how historically they've been fallen a little bit out of touch, because we know that I've heard stories of women veterans going to events and being told they're wearing their medals on the wrong side, and then having to explain to people that actually it's their medals that they've earned themselves. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, we've got lots and lots of military partners in the Milspo group who are women who partners are still serving. So what moves have you been making to make it that little bit better to be a female veteran?
Yeah, I mean, I have experienced that "whose medals are you wearing" moment more than once myself, and it is yeah, it is very frustrating. So what I've included reference to women veterans specifically in my recommendations to government. So what I've said generally is that the public services, because that's what I'm here to look at, the public services must include women veterans when they're looking at the design of their services and their policies. And I think that's having an effect, because I was hearing some feedback from the Poppy Scotland manifesto launch, which took place in Holyrood last week, and apparently the quite a few MSPs were asking about women veterans. So I think that message is percolating through to some of the decision takers, which is really important. So when I have meetings with policymakers and decision takers, these are the sort of issues that I bring up, that the traditional or the stereotype view of a veteran has to be challenged, and that understanding of the veteran community has to be improved to include the huge diversity of our community.
Yeah, because there could be nothing more frustrating than earning medals and then people assuming that they belong to a man.
Yeah, absolutely. Or I mean, and it happens. Yes, it's not just the medals. It happens all the time. There's the kind of casual. I'm not going to call it casual sexism. It's not quite that. It's just I would call it casual ignorance. I think people just make assumptions that I mean, my partner is a long-haired artist. He doesn't have a military bone in the body, but quite often when we go to events, it's assumed that he's the veteran there. I mean, I find that quite funny, but after a while it does get a bit wearing.
What do you say to people in the most politest way? What is your best phrase for picking out people when they say these things?
Well, in those sorts of situations, I'll just explain that he's a long-haired artist, and can't you tell by the long hair that he has never served in the military, and that I'm the military one. When people are a little bit embarrassed when they realise that they've made that assumption. I think it's really important to challenge it and to be forthright about it. I think without being, it's ignorance. It's not. I don't think anyone, well, with certain exceptions, no one's really setting out to demean or belittle women veterans. So I think we can re-educate people in a friendly and relaxed way, and that helps make sure that we're all kind of we all retain that community spirit that's so important to us, without causing even more divisions.
Yeah, they won't make the same mistake the next time.
I'd like to think not. I really would like to think people would learn after doing it once.
And it's brilliant that it's the inclusion and stretching people's view of the military, because it's very easy for the media, for people to fall into the mad, sad and bad concept of veterans. And you mentioned how you worked with homeless before, which I think everybody assumes that military veterans go to war, they're all men, they come home a little bit damaged and then end up on the streets, which is not the story. And we know this is not the story. Are there any projects that you found that have been particularly inspiring to showcase that it's not all of the mad, sad and bad concepts, and that actually veteran life, particularly in Scotland, is so much better than that?
I mean, I think the ways it is illustrated is probably in the employment sphere is one of the biggest employment in business, because I mean, every time I speak to employers who employ veterans and they know they're employing veterans, they are incredibly positive about it. And it's getting to the stage now with some businesses, so the big financial institutions like banks, you know, they really do love to recruit veterans, and I know that they're now competing with each other on recruiting veterans, which is what we want. You know, we want employers to be competing to recruit veterans, recognizing that they are absolutely, you know, among the best employees they could have. So I think the employers, there's lots of that. There are, you know, there are groups on LinkedIn like the Gender Network, which really does, you know, it's supporting, encouraging, and helping veterans helping each other, which is always a theme. Veterans helping each other is, you know, has been the theme for, I think, as long as we've had armed forces, to be honest. So those are really positive. And the civil service in Scotland, for example, has a scheme to employ, and that includes spouses as well, which is excellent, to provide, you know, short contracts for veterans and spouses, and if you know, and with the potential for them to turn into permanent roles as well. So so I think in the employment field, those are really positive. Other projects tend to focus on the higher needs groups, which is correct, because there are groups of veterans that do have needs, and as you say, the media loves a story about homeless veterans or damaged veterans, and that is a massive challenge. It is a real challenge to try and overcome that stereotype. And I've noticed now it's in popular entertainment as well, and you know, there's no chance of government intervention in television drama. Always goes spectacularly wrong, doesn't it? There's not really much you can do about that. But the one television series I saw recently, where the shorthand for why somebody died of a drug overdose in a park was because they'd served in Afghanistan, and then that was literally the link. It was why was he a drug addict? Well, because he served in Afghanistan. Which, you know, if you look at statistics, I think you'll find if you served in Afghanistan, you were far less likely to be a drug addict than if you hadn't. You know, that's the truth. But getting the statistics out there is really hard. There's been some great research work done in Scotland. So Professor Beverly Bergman has done a really good longitudinal study of veterans' health in Scotland, and that shows that veterans are generally healthier than the rest of the population, not more likely to have serious psychological health needs. It's really interesting research, because it also shows that the longer somebody served, generally the more protective that is as well. So we find early service leavers quite often have more needs and have less successful outcomes. But of course, some of them have served a very short time indeed. It could be a matter of weeks, and so, you know, a lot of that is not service related issues. So excuse me. So Professor Bergman's work is really helpful in highlighting the kind of protective effects of service on health.
Yeah. That's all right. And so important to that research exists, and that actually, I think with all things, it just takes a little bit of time, just takes time chipping away at these things, like female veterans, like the concept of veterans coming back from Afghanistan. It just takes time and changing the conversation and changing the outlook, which I assume is a huge part of your job and what you do.
Well, trying to change that narrative is definitely part of my role. It's part of the Scottish Government's strategic plan for veterans and the UK Government's strategic plan for veterans. But it takes everybody. I mean, and as I say, it's a challenge, and it's not going to be quick or easy to do that. So it does take everybody, including, you know, veterans themselves. You know, and as I've put a great, I'm always asking employers, if they employ veterans, to really shout about that. Those who join the employee recognition scheme, you know, gold holders are supposed to be evangelists for veterans, so they should be shouting about it. But that often doesn't happen, and you know, it's not as an eye-catching a news story saying that veterans make great employees isn't really news, whereas, you know, veterans are all homeless and suffering it will sell newspapers. So that, you know, there are challenges here. So we all need to really lean into that. And the wider community, families as well. It's, you know, as you say, it's a war of attrition, and it's just about being relentlessly hammering that positive message. And you know, I think it's starting to gain a little bit of traction. We see in some areas, like in academia in Scotland, you know, all the universities and college have an Armed Forces Veterans Network, and I think they are starting to understand more. It's not about helping needy people. It's about actually, there's some really great students, postgrads, you know, available from the service world, and about welcoming them into the fold as well.
Good. That's really good to hear, because from the outside, it sometimes can look really different. And for somebody who's still in, he's in, I'm just knocking around next to him, but he is currently serving and inevitably will become a veteran because he, you know, will get old. He might choose to leave. But then there's the other side of the coin where one day he may not longer be here due to military life. And I'm really aware that the work that you're doing around bereaved families is really important, because I would imagine that they feel sort of stuck between two worlds, where they aren't part of the military community anymore, and yet key to the military community anymore. They've not changed as a person. And yet I know from what people have told me that they just feel a little bit lost in it. But you have focused on bereaved families and military partners and how to get them back in the fold and included.
Yes, I mean, that's really important. And as you say, they've never served necessarily, so they're not veterans. They're not service people either. And as one bereaved spouse put it to me, when people leave the forces, they get transition to do it. But when somebody is forcibly ejected from being a forces spouse to being a widow because of a death, a widow or widower, then there's no transition package for them. It's, you know, there's an immediate change in circumstances, and at the moment I don't think we're getting it right for spouses, to be perfectly frank. I think there is more to be done on the service side, on the in-service side, but also continuing to include the bereaved community in the veteran community, and make sure that from my side, from the statutory side, that policies and services explicitly include the bereaved community when they're talking about the veteran community, which is something that I discussed last week with the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland, and it's been agreed that you know, the bereaved community are part of the Armed Forces family community that will be a priority in the next coming year. And I saw a great example at the Legion Scotland conference last week, when there was a representative from the War Widows Association, and she told me that Legion Scotland are great at always including them. So when they have events, whatever they're doing, all the veterans things that they do, they always include the War Widows Association, always invite them along to take part. So she feels really included. So those are kind of great examples, but they are often overlooked and forgotten, or even not sure if something, does that include me? Does that mean me? And it's frustrating, because the bereaved are specifically mentioned in the Armed Forces Covenant as being as possibly requiring special consideration, and even with that, they don't get considered quite often. So it's frustrating, but I really hope that will change.
Yeah, and they should do it. Out of anybody that has ever been part of the armed forces community, I think the bereaved should be the top priority, because
absolutely, because they've given the most, and that's what it said. What the covenant says: those who have given the most, including the bereaved community, and then everybody proceeds to not include them in their policies. So when it comes to things like housing policies, that, you know, we really should be saying that you know, there's quite a lot of good work done around ensuring that disabled veterans get adapted properties, but far less said about ensuring that bereaved families get properly housed when they've potentially, you know, having to move out of military accommodation. So that, you know, these sort of things do need to change.
yeah, they really do, because it's such a thing. Oh, hang on, I can do it. It's such a thing that could happen to anybody. That's the sad reality of it. You know, one day things could be very different. Just because my husband's here and serving currently, I mean, he's flying today, I'm sure he'll be safe, but you know, you never know. And it is an armed forces, the giveaways in the name. It's an armed forces, and there should be provision, and we should be looked after because we have given so much.
Definitely. And I think also it's, you know, aside from the covenant, the promise of the nation, it's thinking in the bigger terms of recruitment and retention to our armed forces. I think most people when they think about joining, would like to think that any family they had would be properly looked after in the event that they make the ultimate sacrifice, which is what we're asking of our service people. And at the moment, I don't think we can really say that we're looking after bereaved families in the way that that you would the way that could be done to ensure that everybody thinks that yes, I'm serving, I'm putting my life on the line, but I know that my family will be looked after if the ultimate sacrifice is required. And I think now is the time to get these things in place without wanting to sound like a complete doom monger. We're not in we do have a lot of operational commitments at the moment, but we don't have a very ones that are resulting in lots of casualties. But that will change. I mean, there's nothing more guaranteed, I think, than that eventually we will be engaged in another war. So let's get the policies and practice right now to prepare for the future.
Who does that fall under? Is that because this is the curious line as a military partner, is that we're never entirely sure where we fall under. Is it the MOD because we're not serving? Is there anybody that actually advocates for us and looks after us? Is it a veterans thing? Do you know whereabouts we fall in the whole system?
So the MOD do have some responsibility for the bereaved, so providing for the immediate support and provision visiting officers for bereaved families that comes under the Ministry of Defence. But a lot of the services that bereaved people will need are devolved services. So some of the services provided by the NHS or in Scotland by NHS Scotland, we're looking at housing. If they are looking at housing coming from the statutory side, again, that's a once they've moved out of military housing, if they need housing from local authority, then that's a devolved issue. So that's why everybody needs to understand that the bereaved are part of the veterans community. So the initial response is still from the Ministry of Defence, but at some point, bereaved families do move away from, they don't become veteran families, but they are, in effect, they're like veterans families, and they'll be accessing statutory support from the the wider services provided by their devolved administration or the government.
Perfect. Good. It's good to know that there is things in place and there's a handover. You talked about your devolved government and Scotland. You are obviously the Commissioner for Scotland. So you've spoken previously in your reports on your website about how Scotland is a great place to be a veteran and you're going to make it even better. Why is that? How does Scotland stand up above the other countries to be a veteran or partner to a military person? And why is it so good?
Okay, I mean, I would say there's still room for improvement for Scotland to be, the best part of the UK. That's actually the Scottish Government's vision is for Scotland to be the best part of the UK to be a veteran and veterans' family to settle. So there's some great things in place already. So we have the GP recognition scheme. It's still rolling out, but that's a really good bit of training for general practitioners and their staff to understand it. It has strands on women veterans and LGBT veterans, and it has a bit on understanding families are all part of the veteran community. So there's some really good work going on in the health services. There are some specific health services for veterans, particularly in the area of mental health, and that's being developed. Every local authority has an Armed Forces and Veterans Champion. Every NHS Scotland Health Board has an Armed Forces and Veterans Champion. The Police Scotland have veterans champions. There's quite a lot of veteran champions actually, which is really good, and they are now all kind of tend to talk to each other. So the network is spreading there. Every local authority has been given guidance on housing for veterans, on why they can give them potentially give them special consideration, or at least give them some sort of priority. That varies across local authorities. So some give veterans quite a lot of priority, others give fewer. I would say there's a housing emergency just been declared in Scotland. So even with priority, that doesn't mean to say that a veteran is going to be getting a house from their local authority because of the really difficult housing situation. But actually, to be perfectly frank, in some areas, Scotland risks falling behind other parts of the UK because of some of the good work that's going on elsewhere. So always trying to encourage the Scotland to keep up with other best practice that we see, such as the move into supporting veterans in custody, Nova, which is part of NHS England, but we don't have in Scotland. I mean, well, I'm maybe biased, but Scotland is a good place to live generally. So there's things that are not to do with veterans, like having free prescriptions for everybody, for example. So those can be quite helpful. On the other side, the tax burden is slightly higher in Scotland. So for higher earners, and I do hear that from obviously the military community don't have to get a refund on the higher taxes they pay, but that doesn't necessarily apply to spouses. And once people leave, if they're living in Scotland and have a good job and a pension, they might find their taxes they will find their taxes a bit higher. So there's, it's not paradise, but it is a good place to live, and it certainly has some advantages.
And it's very beautiful.
Well, yeah, yes. I mean, most of Scotland's very beautiful, but then most of the UK is very beautiful. There are just some parts that they're a bit less beautiful than others.
Yes, apparently
we have. Sorry.
Oh, no, you go.
I was going to say we have more midges, which
Oh,
can be an issue.
yes, you do. No, but it is beautiful and very much more beautiful than many places I've been posted to. So I think inevitably we might be ending up in Scotland. So we've talked about the things you cover, the people you look after, at what stage you become a veteran. What are you most proud of in your job? What do you think you do best that really showcases the veteran community or the work you do?
But I think what I enjoy doing the most is meeting veterans, members of the community, and listening to them. And I've been trying really hard to do that, to really kind of cast the net as wide as possible, listen to as many veterans as possible. So the current thematic work I'm doing at the moment is on veterans in the law. So I've met I've got 2 meetings with Police Scotland next week. I've met the Crown agents and Procurator Fiscal. I've been into half a dozen prisons and met veterans who are in prisons and their prison officers. So I think really getting to listen to the ex-service community is something that I really enjoy doing, and I think that's working quite well. And I think the other thing that I think works really well is the annual assessment I do of progress on the Scottish Government's work with veterans. So that's based on the Veteran Commissioner recommendations. So with my so there's been 87 so far, mostly by my predecessors, 87 recommendations made by commissioners, and I track those every year and produce a report, and then it gets debated in the Scottish Parliament, and that really brings to the fore where there's good practice and also where there's gaps, and it's very public. So it's on my website, it's very transparent, anyone can have a look at it. I send my report to all the members of the Scottish Parliament so that they can all debate with the minister in this debate. So it makes it as public as possible, as transparent as possible, so people can see where things are going with veteran services in Scotland. And I think that's really important.
Yes, a bit of accountability, always important.
Absolutely.
So I added a new question to this podcast series because previously I'd asked who my guests wanted me to interview, and the answer was always the MOD. They want to hear directly from the horse's mouth about what they're thinking, what they're up to. But you get access to people who are the policymakers. From your experience, do they understand the value and the importance that the military family and the wider military community has to operational effectiveness and how the armed forces are viewed? And do they really see how important military spouses, partners, families, veterans are?
I think there is probably a gap in understanding between the policymakers and what's actually happening on the ground. So I think the understanding is there that we can't have effective military forces without the supportive network behind them. We just wouldn't have armed forces if we didn't have families supporting them. And that was true for my time going to sea, as it has been, for hundreds of years, I would say. But I think where the gap is, where the people who are producing policies think that those are being actually carried out everywhere. to the same standard, and I don't think that's the case. And in that, and the kind of the feedback from families and service people and veterans themselves to these policymakers, that's where more can be done to understand that what's in the JSP or what's in the policy is not actually being delivered, or it's been delivered in a very inconsistent way.
Yeah. Is there anything we can do about that as people on the ground living this life?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's not accepting when it's going wrong, and to really speak up about it, and to whether that's through your MP, or whether it's or local authority, or whether it's through your chain of command for serving people, but to make a bit of a noise about things that are not right. I think not always easy in the armed forces, because of course service complaints are sometimes, it's even now taken with a kind of a dim view of people being complaining, but I think the complaint service is getting a bit better. But I would say speaking up is probably quite important.
Yeah, because there are lots of people whose job is welfare and support and to advocate for the military families. So we should take advantage of this and yeah, get some words on paper and send it to them. So we're coming towards the end of this interview. Is there anything else that you want to add before we finish?
I think, yes, I think it's things, there's definitely improvement. There's definitely will, and certainly from what I see in Scotland, there is political will across the spectrum to support serving families and veterans. So it takes I think it takes some of that feedback and a bit of pressure to make sure that it continues. But to end on a positive note, there's certainly lots of goodwill towards the armed forces and veterans community still. So it's just a question of trying to keep turning that goodwill into actual practical application, and sometimes straightforward funding.
Yes. And you can keep flying the flag. We'll keep flying the flag. We'll do like a pincer movement and we'll get there through all these different avenues and changing what people think and just showing the world that military families are completely epic and we're doing epic things as well. And just showing that military families are completely epic and we're doing amazing things and the conversations will change and it will get noticed. So thank you so much for chatting to me today. It's been fabulous. I love the fact that Scotland sounds like it's on board with the veterans and the serving families. And I will need to tell my husband that's where we're going to move when he inevitably retires. I can't wait. It's going to be beautiful. So thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure to speak to you again, Jess, and I look forward to seeing you in Scotland in due course.